Hey, what's going on, folks? Welcome back to the Graphic Design is Fun podcast. My name's Dan. What do you get when you have two graphic designers who have no formal training and live 3,292 miles apart? The answer: Plastikcomb Magazine. Today, we are chatting with Aaron Beebe, a graphic designer and collage artist who created Plastikcomb Magazine along with Thomas Shostak in 2020. The magazine is an independent, biannual publication melding art with graphic design, which Aaron describes as a beautiful mess. The content of the magazine is basically interviews with artists and designers. So, kind of like this podcast, a little bit. But it's so much more than just the content. Plastikcomb is all about wild, chaotic layouts that are a bit of a throwback to some of these famous magazines from the 90s, like Ray Gun, which was, of course, led by famous designer David Carson. So things are crazy. It's not your typical magazine by any means. I'm a big fan. Basically, how this episode came to be, Aaron is a fan of the podcast, just coincidentally, and he shared one of the episodes on his Instagram story, which I really appreciated. And also thanks to everybody who's shared the podcast, just by the way. But so I was checking out his page and saw that he had this crazy magazine going, and we got to chatting a little bit. He asked me if I wanted to put an ad in their upcoming issue. So there's going to be a little ad, well, full page ad for this podcast in Plastikcomb number 6, I believe, is their next one, which is coming out any day now. There'll be links in the description if you want to buy a copy, which you definitely should. And I asked him to chat for the podcast, which he was super down for, and just got to hear about how this magazine got started, a little bit about Aaron's background, which is not a super typical one. Anyway, you'll hear all about it in the episode. Without further ado, please enjoy today's episode with Aaron Beebe. It used to be when I started this that like I was always so nervous, but now that I've done a few of these, I sometimes forget that for the person on the other end, it is kind of a weird experience to be like interview. Well, I guess you've done a few interviews, so it's not really, maybe not so weird.
Yeah, and sometimes people kind of might get caught up in like, oh, what are they going to ask me? And, oh, I have to try to think about, how to answer that. Or I think, it's best. And you've already, like you said, you've already done these multiple times, just kind of have a conversation, right?
Yeah. I like the conversation. Sometimes people will ask me for the questions ahead of time, and I will do it, but I don't like it as much because I find they're like getting ready to give an answer that they've thought about, even if we haven't quite, even if the conversation hasn't flowed there naturally because, they had the questions ahead of time, they were thinking it through. But
Right.
I also get it. I feel like if somebody asked me to be on their podcast, I would be like, give me the questions ahead of time. Like I got to be prepared. But so I don't know.
But I see what you're saying, because like you want to respect the other person, right? But then it becomes more structured, and it's not kind of like fluid. Yeah.
But that being said, I do have lots of questions prepared. Lots of questions prepared for you, Aaron. So if you're ready, let's get into it and talk about this magazine.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I guess let's just start at the beginning, or maybe if people are listening who aren't familiar, how would you describe what the magazine is?
I would say I always tend to sum it up in 2 words: a beautiful mess. That's how I always kind of coin the magazine. And again, it's not for everybody, right? So when we're talking about graphic design, there's such a spectrum of like Massimo, who's like grid based, to Carson or Ashworth, and they're kind of more chaotic in a way, unconventional, we'll say. So my magazine leans obviously more towards that. But what I like to do is in our design, I like to have the audience, or the person obviously reading the magazine, they're more engaged, right? So some things, we try to make everything legible, but sometimes it is a little harder to read to make the person go, oh, what's this? Or turn the page, or right.
Yeah.
So then they're like, oh, what's that? So it's more engaging.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, the engagement thing, because it totally works. And I was just going through again reading the Hamburg story, which I guess maybe we'll talk about later, or talk about you and your co-creator Thomas. But the fact that you have to literally read it upside down, it forces you to, you're in it. You're not just kind of casually flipping through. You actually kind of have to, physically be rotating this thing, and yeah, you're going to be more engaged as a result of that.
And some people might be annoyed by it, right? They're like, oh, I don't,
Oh, yeah.
why are you making me? but I think for the most part, people are open to it. At least, the ones that are buying a magazine or reading.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. Because that's, it's kind of part of the fun, part of the appeal.
Yep.
And can you talk about what the name plastic comb means?
So I I guess you could say I'm an artist, and in the fact that I use the term loosely, I guess, but and I my background is more collage. So, in back when I was in the military, and we can get into that later, but I really didn't have time to do artwork, and collage. It allowed me to do creative things kind of quickly and not have big space. So I would use found images, paper, so on and so forth, and I would, you know, trying to do these collages. Well, plastic home, the word itself is a metaphor for a collage. And in the States, and I don't know if they did it in Canada, but at least back when I was younger, it was when it was picture day, when you would go get your picture taken and you'd be in the photo album for the year. You would have to go get your picture taken, and while you're staying in line, they would hand out these plastic cones to fix your hair. And so your hair would kind of like maybe be a mess, and you would take this plastic comb and you would fix it. And more than likely, an adult would end up doing it for you, and it would totally change your appearance. So you would totally wouldn't look like yourself, right? So the whole thing with the plastic comb is you're taking one thing and you're turning it into something else, just like a collage. So you're taking an image, let's say it used to be in it was an ad for something in the 50s, and then you take it and then you change it into something else. So that's the metaphor for plastic comb.
Yeah,
That's our country.
I love that. I don't know about in Canada. I don't remember using a comb or being given a comb, and I feel like if I look at my
Yeah.
old pictures, my hair was pretty wild. Um,
Yeah, yeah, you're young, you're a lot younger than I am, so I'm sure they probably stopped doing that maybe in the 80s.
could be,
So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
You briefly mentioned your time in the military, but maybe before we get into kind of the how the magazine came to be, you yourself, um, what's your design background and kind of that trajectory and your career been like?
so we'll go way way back again talking about school, right? So high school. So I graduated high school, and my mother, she came from New Zealand when she was about 19 or so. She came to the States, and so I was a dual citizen. And my plans were from high school, I was going to go to art school in New Zealand. So I was going to fly from the States, and I was like packing my bags. You know, I'm going to New Zealand where I was considered a resident. So I didn't have to pay for school. So I went over, and unfortunately things didn't work out, and I had to come back to the States. And I ended up working odd jobs, and mostly in the art department and in screen printing, these small mom and pop screen printing shops. So I worked in the art department there, and that's where I kind of got a more feel for liking graphic design. Because before I was more kind of like into drawing illustration, but once I started messing with computers and actually doing graphic design for these signs and t-shirts and whatnot, I became more involved and excited about it. So I was doing that for a bit, and my friend, he lived in New York City, and he was like, "Hey, why don't you move on out here and try to get a job doing something? Who knows what that is, right? Just come on out." And this was like mid '90s, so I was in my mid 20s, and I was like, "What the heck? Kind of a dead end job here, nothing really going on for me." So I moved out to New York City, and I ended up in this small studio apartment with my friend. We literally had to like make this partition to split the room for our beds. And so I lived in New York City for a year. Such a wonderful experience, crazy. So I could go on about that with all these different stories. But so I was there for a year. And what I was doing was I was working for his brother as a photo assistant. And I would have to get up really early, and then we would go on these photo shoots with these supermodels. And it's funny because they
Whoa.
like, "Oh, I have to get up at 5 and change outfits and get paid, 15 grand for a day." And here I am, like literally like laying in cow shit, holding up like light reflectors for $150, right? So I had this epiphany while I was there, and I was like, again, my life isn't really going anywhere, and I want to change. So out of the blue, I was like, I'm going to join the military. And at the time, I was 26, and
Wow.
I was like, I'll get the GI Bill, and then do 4 years, get the GI Bill, and go to school. So I ended up joining the military kind of later in life, and yeah. So then the next thing you know, my 4 years are up, and I was 32 at the time, 31 or two, and I was doing so well. I got promoted quickly. I was getting a more structure in my life, which I think I definitely needed at the time because I was just kind of like going from job to job, not really knowing what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I joined the military, and I did well. And, you know, within that time, I did 20 years, but I didn't really do much as far as working on my art
Well, so
or,
after 4 years, that wasn't the end. You stuck. You were there 20 years.
yep. Yeah, I did 20. Ended up doing 20 years. I did so well. Like, I mostly did finance, which I can't stand, which is funny, but I pretty much, I excelled in it, and I did well. And I was like, hey, if I do 20 years, I'll get a retirement. So yeah. So within that time, staying in, I really didn't have much time to work on my own personal stuff, but I always had a desire to do something creative, right? And so one of the things is I wanted to go back a little bit. When I was in my mid 20s before I joined the Coast Guard, my life kind of changed as far as graphic design is concerned. Because again, I wasn't really much into it in the beginning, but uh, once I saw the ray gun, and I don't know if you're familiar with that magazine, but it kind of changed my life as far as graphic design is concerned because it was something so new. And I was so excited to like turn the page and be like, oh, because you didn't know what would come up next, right? Even though you couldn't necessarily read a lot of it, it was just so visually pleasing to me. And there was something inside of me like that struck uh, a fire. I was like, oh, this is something that I would kind of like to do. Now, I don't know if I necessarily would do it in graphic design, but more in my collages. So my collage work is more kind of more graphic design orientated when you look at it, and it has a lot of text in it.
Right.
So going through the military and not being able to do much creative stuff, I had this idea about in 2013. I was like, hey, I only have a couple more years until I retire. And I always kind of had this idea then at that time to do this magazine, this art magazine that was in the concept of ray gun, right? But it was using artwork instead of music. And I was like, oh, what if the design kind of played and kind of went off of the artwork and everything kind of came together? and it made it like the magazine itself is a piece of art, right? So I actually had the idea for Plastikcomb probably like in 2013. So it was a long time until I was actually able to work on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So like after you finished with the military, what year was that? Like 2016?
2019.
Oh,
2019.
2019. Okay, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I retired right before it was like maybe 6, 7 months before COVID really started. And so at that time, I was like, oh, everything kind of shut down. And I was like, this will give me some time to work on some creative projects of my own. And I had this idea, and it was like kind of a precursor to Plastikcomb, and it's called Think Two. And it's a collage book that I did. I did a call where people had to submit analog collages, but it had to contain some kind of text in it. So what I did was I had a call for that, and that was like March 2020. So right around the beginning of COVID. And I had a decent amount of people respond. And so I kind of curated these works. And what I did was what I was going to do is like kind of have the artwork and then the typical artist name and the name of the piece, whatever. And I was like, what if I kind of took this idea that I kind of had, and I was like, I'll take the collage, I'll have it on one side, but on the other side, I will kind of do the name of the artist and the name of the artwork kind of in this creative fashion
Right.
where it kind of played off of the artwork.
Mm.
So that's where it was born. The concept, even though I had a little bit of idea of what I wanted to do back in 2013, the real solid concept came about when I did this project. So I was like, oh, what if I use this format with the magazine? And then the next thing you know, a couple months after that, I did the first Plastikcomb. And not many people knew about it, but when it was finished, I was like, whoa, this is something, right? I have something here.
Yeah, seriously. So okay, so when you started this magazine, you had done this collage book that you sort of felt was like this was an idea that was working. Let's like take it and create this magazine idea. How does Thomas get involved? Because he was there from the beginning, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I didn't even know who Thomas was. And I don't know if you know who he is, but he kind of has his own group following, his own cult following. He started this PDF magazine back in the early 2000s. It's called Beast. And I don't know if you know about it, but you need to look it up. So do you know about it?
No, well, I didn't know about it
Yeah.
before,
Okay.
but in kind of getting ready for this podcast, I went through some of it, and also all these other like it just felt like everywhere I looked, people talk about it like it really is kind of legendary, and yeah, like has like a
But
cult following even to this day. But I don't know,
yes.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I never heard of it either until 2020.
Hmm.
So yeah, and you'd be amazed like how many people are like, "Oh, you get to work with Thomas? Oh man, oh, you're so lucky." Yeah, and I feel lucky, but the way it came about was when I did this project Think Two, this collage book. I happened to see a post and that went in my feed, and I was like, "Man, whose work is that?" Right? And it ended up being Thomas. And I randomly reached out to him because he didn't know about the call I had for this collage book I was doing. I randomly reached out to him and I was like, "Hey, would you be interested in do a collage for the book?" And he's so super, humble, nice about it. He's like, "Yeah, sure, man. Whatever, cool." And then a couple of days later, bam, he sends me this kick-ass collage, and that's how I kind of started this relationship with him. And once I got to know more about his work, I was like, "Man, he'd be perfect to bring on to do some of this editorial design I'd like to do for the magazine." Like he's spot on of where I want to go with this. So a couple of months later, after this Think project I did, I, I emailed him and I was like, "Hey man, would you be interested in doing a spread? A 14-page spread for one of the artists?" kind of, and this is what I'm kind of going for, more of that ray gun kind of feel. And he wrote back to me immediately. He's like, sure, man, whatever. Yeah, I'll do one spread. I'll do one of the artists. And I was over the moon. I was like, oh, awesome, man. Cool. But meanwhile, I had to design. So each issue, I have 8 artists. So, and I'm like, oh, I also have to design all this other 7 other artists, right? And he did it so quickly because it just comes so naturally to him that he was like, hey, do you want me to do another one? I was like, hey, do you want to do another 3? He's like, sure. Next thing you know, we both did the half of the first issue. So half of them are done by me and half of them are done by him. And I designed the cover. And it's even though it didn't, like, a lot of people didn't know about it, but the people that found out about it were so excited. They're like, man, you're bringing back that day of, in the 90s, of that unconventional design that I've been craving for years. And I'm like, man, thank you. Like, that means a lot to me that I can recreate that feeling, because I had the feeling too, right? And that was one of the main reasons I was doing it. And thinking now, me talking to you, I don't think I ever answered your question. Like, I have no formal education in graphic design whatsoever. I I dropped out. I mean, I went to school for a minute and dropped out, but it's all kind of self-taught.
Yeah.
But so anyway, going back to the first issue, I worked so easily and so fluid with Thomas that I was like, hey, do you want to work on the second one? And he's all in. Whereas, like, 2 minutes ago, he was like, oh, I guess I'll do a spread. Next thing you know, bam, he's a co-founder. I can't thank him enough, and I couldn't be doing this without him for sure.
Yeah. Man, yeah, no, that's amazing that you found him because like you said, I feel like he brings kind of exactly what you imagined it to be like. What I
Okay.
find funny is like you guys mentioned that you never spoke. You would just email back and forth, like not even just at first, but up until, well, pretty recently, I guess. You literally never even had spoken to the guy.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's pretty elusive. And a lot of people, I think most people, don't even know what he looks like.
Hmm.
And to this day, even all his Beastie fans, but so he kind of was like, let's do this thing we're doing where we're texting. We actually talk to each other every day, but through text.
Yeah.
And he was like, hey, we work so well together that we can just email and text each other and kind of curate for the magazine, and then go through, and he knows exactly what I'm looking for, and he's like, okay, gotcha. And then he'll go off and then he'll design whatever for an artist. And there was no need for us to physically talk. Plus, he doesn't like to really talk on Zoom calls. So, because he does
Uh,
it so much for his regular job, where he's actually just a graphic designer. And
mm,
so we kind of were like, hey, what if, things are working fine? There's no need to physically meet each other or talk to each other on Zoom call or on the phone. And it makes for this cool story, right?
yeah.
So we're like, hey, when are we eventually going to meet one another? And we got invited to this magazine convention in Hamburg, which is kind of just down the street from him, because he's in Essen in
He's in
Germany.
where?
So Essen, Germany.
Oh, okay.
So we're like, well, we'll meet there. So so it ended up being, we did 4 issues, so 2 years without ever talking. It was all text and email that we put out 4 issues of Plastikcomb. And then we met at this convention, and like we were just best buds. Like, we knew each other for years. So, and you read the story, so it kind of like tells
Yeah,
how
it's
things
an
went.
awesome story. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we met, and things just kind of, like, we're all chums.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I couldn't be more grateful, like I said before. So
And so do you pick Like, are you finding the 8 artists that you're interviewing in the magazine?
So what we do is we right before each issue. So we're biannual. So we're doing two a year, and then we'll publish an issue, and then like that following month we'll go right into curating. And all we do is like we send each other like Instagram profiles. We're like,
Hmm.
oh, what about this artist? Cool, man. Sounds good. And then I'll end up emailing them and be like, hey, would you like to be featured in the magazine? And you get a variation of like, oh yeah, that's awesome, to no response,
Yeah.
you know, to
Oh,
no thank you.
I relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, and I'm sure you have already gotten to this point where like you have to like not care, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I always say like it never hurts to ask, because the worst they could say is no or not respond to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably the worst they could say. I don't think it doesn't get worse than that, I guess. Yeah, no, but there's no it might hurt your ego a little bit for a second. Especially if you
Yeah.
can like tell that they saw your email or that they read your message and then they didn't respond, or and I've even had people where they initially say yes and then I can never get in touch with them again, and different things
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
they'll ghost you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I've
And
been there.
it's always a bummer, but for the most part, I think I have, and I think many people relate to this. Like, I'm I'm always surprised at how many people say yes, and how many people who are like objectively out of my league who will benefit nothing from talking to me or
Yeah,
whoever it may be, whatever. And people are just down to chat or to
yeah,
do interviews
yeah,
or to help out a fellow person making something, whatever it is.
yeah.
And it's
Exactly.
yeah, it's mostly a positive
It
experience,
is.
positive outcome. I
It
think.
is.
Yeah.
And I think you'll get to a point where like they'll be like, "Hey, Dan, will you be on my podcast?" And then you're like, "Yeah, sure." And but the funny thing is when you were talking about this, like I was listening to your Ben Cordis. Is that how
Yeah.
you pronounce his name?
Ben
So
Curtis.
he
Yeah.
Cordis. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, Ben. So I was listening at a podcast and he was talking about his Aaron Draplin story, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you have an Aaron Draplin story. So now I'm thinking about what you're talking about, like when you reach out to people and they're like, "Oh yeah." So I
Yeah.
have an Aaron Draplin story.
Oh, what is it?
So a couple of months ago, I reached out to him and I was like, "Hey," just kind of like breaking the ice. And be like, "Oh, your name's cool," because I'm sure it's same name, first name. But I was like, "Hey, I wonder if you'd be interested in like doing something for the magazine." And I was like, not expecting a response whatsoever. And within a day or so, like Aaron responded to me and he was like, "Oh yeah, sure." He was like, "Yeah, if you want to send me some magazines, I'll have a look. Yeah, sure, why not?" He's so open to it. And I'm like, "Oh man, cool, cool." Aaron Draplin, right? So I sent him the magazines, and then he responded. Like he got the magazines. He responded, and he's like, "Man, pretty cool stuff, man. Cool, cool." And I was like, "All right." I was like, "Hey, would you like to like design a cover or maybe do an ad or something?" And he responded very politely. He was like, "Not necessarily my thing,
Hmm.
you know." And again, going back to the format of the magazine, it's not everybody's thing,
Yeah.
right? Where some design is very clean and legible to messy, and some people might call it trash. I'm not saying he called it trash. I'm just saying that it wasn't his thing, and he was very polite about it, and he responded, and I appreciated him for that. So
Yeah.
that's my Aaron Draplin story.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I kind of I see where he's coming from, because for people listening, like you asked me if I wanted to put an ad in for the next issue, a little ad for this podcast, and of course I said yes, but I really, this is not my style either. But I'll figure
And
something
that's
out,
okay,
and
and that's
maybe
and that's
maybe
okay.
it'll be I don't know, a good opportunity to just try some stuff that I don't normally do, or I don't know, who knows what
Yeah.
I'll end up sending you. But yeah, there's no reason why, at least for me, I can't, dabble in something a little different, or I don't know.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, because you never know. It might be freeing. It might. And the thing is, like, we've had a couple students in. So another thing I'm trying to do in the magazine is like bring on design students.
that's cool.
Yeah, and so they're taught certain, when you go through. I mean, I didn't go to design school, so I don't know exactly what they teach, but I'm assuming each professor teaches differently, and they have their own way of doing things and what their beliefs are in graphic design, right? But these design students that are so used to working in a certain way, and then they get to do stuff for the magazine, they're like, "Oh, this is so freeing. I never thought I would be scanning pieces of watermelon or taking this text and cutting it up, or and it actually is helping me in my own designs to be a little more thinking, a little more freely about
Yeah,
stuff, and not being so confined to certain things, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, me personally, I love all types of design, but I find that going more to the trashy end is more uh, aesthetically pleasing to me.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I also think it's interesting because it's often a product of what people grew up with, or what kind of early things
yes,
caught their eye, And like I
right,
feel like for me and a lot of people my age, um, the 90s, I was a baby, so I didn't that
yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
part of my upbringing,
right,
and so it was more like the kind of late 2000s, early 2000s, and so you just get different kind of visual culture that kind of becomes your influences, and your style and that kind of thing. But I also love it because, and I hope that the magazine can reach lots of people, because it is kind of a style that, I think at points has been very, very popular with people like David Carson, but also can be kind of lost. And like you're saying about, a lot of people might go through design school, they might do 4 years of design school and never, sort of quote unquote break the rules in this kind of way. And it's like, yeah, we 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 can't we can't forget about this kind of design, A, because it's awesome, and B, just, it's there's all kinds of different stuff. There's no right or wrong answer.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you get some pretty hard critics, and I've had some, but I'm a grown man. I have thick skin. A lot of the times we keep getting referred to as like, oh, you're Carson. He's already done all that stuff. You're just rehashing what he did. And I'm like, well, he doesn't really own a license on that design per se. It's just that's the first person people go to. They're
Right.
like, oh, you're just trying to be Carson. No, not necessarily. I mean, just because somebody uses a grid doesn't mean they're Massimo, you know?
For sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of big names, that must have been cool. The Stefan Sagmeister review you guys got, which was quite positive.
It was, I'm pretty ecstatic about it. He does this thing, and I don't know if you saw where he's just kind of open to people submitting things.
Yeah, yeah. I've been following him for a while, and I probably saw when he reviewed your guys' magazine at the time. But he
You're like,
does it
what's
pretty.
this rubbish?
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's cool, and I've found lots of cool stuff through that. And and he's honest. Like sometimes he'll say, "Oh, this isn't really
Oh yeah,
working." Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, he can be brutally honest sometimes.
yeah,
He's like, go back to the drawing board, Mister. Like, oh,
yeah. But no, that's cool, and
yeah. It was awesome because I was like, again, going back to the give it a try because you never know, right?
yeah,
Worst he could do is not respond.
yeah,
But I emailed him, and like I'm telling you, within like 5 days, he's doing a post about it. And
yeah,
I'm like, I don't know how many people are submitting things to him. I'd imagine it'd be quite a few.
yeah. You would think, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I mean, we, especially Thomas, he was like, I can't believe that because Thomas has been doing graphic design for 30 years now. So, we're already getting this great critique from Sagmeister. So, I mean, couldn't ask for anything more. And
yeah.
And the thing is, like, this magazine is truly like a roller coaster. It's like going back to like asking kind of more well known people, and they're like, sure, to people not responding at all. But in the fifth one, we got Rudy Vanderlei. So I don't know if you know much about him, but he was big in the '90s with Emigre magazine. Yeah. So, and if you look on the online archive, you can find all the Emigre issues on there. So this guy Rudy, who ended up designing the cover for the fifth issue that you have,
Hmm.
and his spread is in there. We interviewed him, and so it was kind of a big honor to have him in the magazine, and it's kind of opened the door for us to, because he's like, he loves the magazine, and he kind of like told all his design buddies, oh yeah, this is cool, and they're
Hmm.
reaching out and like, oh, I want to be a part of the magazine. And so all these kind of higher end designers that were kind of more big in the '90s are coming back and like, hey, I'm interested in
That's
doing
sick.
stuff. So it's kind of cool.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I always think of like Wes Anderson. So when he did, what was it, Rushmore? I don't know if you saw Rushmore,
No.
but so Wes Anderson, the director, he got Bill Murray to come back in the. So Bill Murray's this big actor, well known, but he wasn't doing anything for years. So then he was like, hey, what if I asked Bill Murray to act in my movie? And he said yes. And it always reminded me of that, like, somebody that was kind of big back in the day, kind of reinvigorating their
Right, right.
career,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So they'd be
Yeah.
more likely to say yes.
Hmm.
They're like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't have really much going on right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I bet they, a lot of the times would be excited because it's like, oh yeah,
Right.
this is like, sort of like a revival in some sense, and like,
Exactly.
it's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited for Plastic Comb 6. You guys have big plans for that. I mean, I'm sure it's well in the works at this point. Um,
And yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we're almost done. I'm just waiting on a couple more things. Yeah, man. So I think it's going to be even better than the last one. So
Mhm.
we're each issue we're kind of like fine tuning and
Yeah.
getting it tweaked a little bit here and there to be kind of more well defined magazine. But it's great because like each issue a little bit, it gets discovered a little bit more and more. And we're in quite a few stores now that we're working with a distributor with the fifth one, and so things are pretty exciting.
Sweet. Well, yeah, all the best with the magazine, and I'll certainly be continuing to read. And again, thanks for chatting on the podcast and for listening to the podcast. This is
Yeah,
so
yeah,
cool.
man.
Again, I'm I'm
Yeah.
I'm honored that you're a fan. And yeah, dude, thanks for doing this. This was fun.
Cool, man. And I really appreciate you having me on and flapping my gums. But keep up the good work with your podcasting.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Graphic Design is Fun podcast. If you want to support the show, you can share it with your friends, share it with your coworkers. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave a 5-star review. Any of those things helps a ton. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Oh, and you can follow on Instagram at Graphic Design is Fun. Yeah.